This dark room is not one fit for habitation. I have spent 3 entire weeks in here, cataloging its contents of documents and drawings. This is the library cave as it was in 1908. Not long before, tens of thousands of ancient documents were discovered here. As news of this discovery shook the world, French sinologist Paul Pelliot arrived. After returning with cases of documents to France, Pelliot remarked, "I did not leave behind any items of significance. These items of significance were scrolls of history and records, long lost to history." One such scroll recorded the lives of Dunhuang's residents during the late Tang early Song period, their tribulations, and their miraculous luck. His name was Cao Yunzhong. He was Dunhuang's governor. The locals called him the King of Dunhuang. Under his rule, life in the far western province of Dunhuang was considered pretty good, especially compared to the chaos that engulfed the rest of China during the Tang Song transition. This is the village of Yuyachuan in 2007, located under Dunhuang's Mount Mingsha. The camels are up bright and early for their work shift up on the mountain. The tourists there are already waiting for them. The driver's last name is Chin. This village is his home. His family owns 2 camels and 50 acres of grapevines in the foothills below Mount Mingsha. Spring is here, which means it's time for him to dig out last year's grapevines from below the earth in preparation for this year's harvest. Because arable land is so scarce here in the desert, it is highly precious. Residents must carefully cultivate and conserve any that have, and have done so for nigh on 2,000 years. At the Bibliothèque Nationale de France document Pelliot number 3257 records a land dispute that occurred sometime in the past near Mount Mingsha. 1,000 years ago, a widow by the name of A Long came to the local government to submit her case. The King of Dunhuang personally oversaw this case. We invited the General Secretary of the Dunhuang Turpan Academic Society, Chai Jianhong, to help decipher the case file. This small court case about a widow from Dunhuang has now become the most important document for historians who wish to research about life in ancient China throughout the world.
What we are about to display is a true story that occurred over 1,000 years ago in Dunhuang. In order to retrieve land taken from her, the widow Ah Long made her case in front of the local court.
Ah Long, what are you raising this lawsuit for?
Your Honor, he stole 22 acres of land from me.
This small court case about a widow from Dunhuang has now become the most important document for historians who wish to research about life in ancient China throughout the world.
And yet we have from it little windows into ordinary people's lives. And that's what's so exciting, because those people would otherwise be completely unknown to us.
Each of the Mogao Cave's murals and documents hides a fragment of a story from the life of someone insignificant, like pieces from a jigsaw puzzle centuries in the making. It is up to experts to assemble the pieces and reconstruct what life in Dunhuang was like in ancient times.
You get a piece from this part of the picture and a piece from this part of the picture and another piece here, and then you have to try to imagine what the whole picture is.
British Dunhuang researcher Susan inserted the story of this widow into the jigsaw puzzle of Dunhuang's history. Like with the Buddhist faith, Dunhuang society flourished in this time period 1,000 years in the past. And just like today's women have a vibrant social scene, 1,000 years ago, Ah Long didn't have to venture far to find her own social circle in Dunhuang. It was called the Society of Women, Dunhuang Society for Female Adherents of Buddhism. Society members periodically go to the Mogao caves to contemplate Buddhist texts and make offerings at the shrines. Members signed up in a registry and were notified about upcoming events. The society also functioned as a support group. Whenever a member faced hardship in her life, the other members banded together to offer assistance. One member's name was Ya He. She had a rocky relationship with her mother-in-law. Their constant quarreling in private didn't go unnoticed, and records of their arguments are often eagerly studied by experts.
The mother-in-law complained that she's sulky and obstinate and never gets up on time. She said, "I can't take this anymore. Let's see you sleep in if I don't feed you for 3 days." The wife then threatens to divorce, which instead cheers the mother-in-law up. "I never wanted you to marry my son. If you want to divorce him, that's fine by me. Here, I'll give you all the things in this house. Take them, and I'll buy a new set of bed sheets as a gift, too." As if to say she's chasing out an evil spirit. The wife seems to enjoy the idea as well. "At least I'll be away from you, old hag. And I will marry someone who actually loves me." This entry is pretty sympathetic to the woman. Perhaps the author believes that she shouldn't have to mold herself to others' expectations, that she has a right to be her own person.
In their pursuit of equal rights, women in Dunhuang have gained the freedom to divorce their husbands. But at the Woman Society, they still needed to follow a code of rules, and making regular contributions of funds and supplies. This was the only way to guarantee that the society will help pay for and arrange their proper funerary services in order to usher them to nirvana. Judging by this description, it sounds like the equivalent of modern-day life insurance. How then does that factor into funerals? As it turns out, society in ancient Dunhuang had a different view on funerals. This is a fresco called Picture of the Elderly Entering His Grave. It's not a funeral procession for the recently deceased, but rather an elderly person reaching the end of his life, who has, after saying his farewells to his family, come to the graveyard of his own volition to be interred into a tomb in order to die isolated from the world at large. In these two murals of the same subject, there are even dancing revelers. But why would they willingly go to await their deaths if it is not yet their time? This isn't an ordinary graveyard. The burial chambers are decorated like Buddhist temples. The people believe that, if one contemplates the Buddhist scriptures as they reach the end, they are able to leave this world with a clear heart. In some of Buddhism's scriptures, it was believed that if one chanted prayers to Amitabha as they died, they would be brought one step closer towards the paradise of the Pure Land. But for this crying woman, the thought of saying goodbye carries too much pain. This was true for more and more of the faithful, like our protagonist, Ah Long. But, as one can see, nothing lasts forever. Many years ago, a man from the nomadic tribes, living a different lifestyle, started a chain of events that led to Ah Long's land dispute case.
Your Honor, this land was bequeathed to me by my uncle 11 years ago.
So Jinjun was Ah Long's younger brother-in-law. Some say he was from Dunhuang, while others say he was Tuyuhun. Murky information about his life caused the government to mistakenly give Ah Long's share of the inherited land to him 11 years ago. The widow's case file was written by the court's clerks. The testimonies of those involved have now become the beginnings of a short story. The most moving part is those about Ah Long's brother-in-law, So Jinjun. Many years ago, a raiding party of Tuyuhun from Dunhuang South came to Dunhuang. The then young So Jinjun was abducted and taken with them back to the southern mountain, and that was the last anyone heard from him in a long time.
The southern mountain that they refer to is what we call Mount Qilin. Back then, several minority ethnicities lived in that area. They included Tunyan, Tibetan, Qiang, and others. Sometimes they went north to harass Dunhuang. I believe that Su Jinjun was probably taken during one of these many raids.
Dunhuang is bordered by Mount Qilian to its south, the economically prosperous Ganxi corridor to its east, and the vast Taklamakan Desert to its west. The disparate groups of Chinese and Western minorities mingle in this cosmopolitan trade hub. The now adult Suo Jinjun shows up one day out of the blue. No one can know for certain whether this stranger is the child that was kidnapped that fateful day. But he gifted the local government with 2 strong thoroughbred horses and petitioned them for a share of the Suo brothers' inheritance. After the death of her husband and son, Ah Long's land remained barren. The government mistakenly gave this land to the newly arrived So Jun and made him the head of the household. Ah Long's life was turned upside down.
The land beside that glutch was already mine before I married into the Su family. Aside from that land, we had some other property. That paperwork we filled when we married was very thorough. If I didn't have that land, how did I fill out that paperwork?
It is the case that the Suo family is a prominent family in Dunhuang. In Chinese feudalistic society, the rich and powerful inherited their influence and culture. In Dunhuang, Zhang Yichao of the Zhang family was a military commissioner. Suo Shun of the Suo family had also served as a military commissioner. Plus, they were related by marriage to the ruling Zhao family. Ah Long seemed to be at a severe disadvantage in this case, but in fact, she had also had ties to the Zhang, Suo, and Cao families, because it is recorded in the court document that one of her witnesses is called Zhang Yungrun, who served as a judge. This proves that Ah Long did have some connections to leverage.
In Dunhuang, if one wishes to ascertain a certain family's social standing, one must go to the Mogao Caves and examine that family's private cave shrine. During the dynastic eras, Dunhuang's population were very devout Buddhists. Many people paid for cave temples to be excavated at Mogao for use in meditation and making offerings to idols Buddha. It was believed that this would facilitate enlightenment, thereby escaping the endless cycle of suffering, bringing reward in the next life. In order to enshrine their own contributions, The sponsors left representations of themselves and their names inside the caves for posterity. Through these efforts, today we can track down Lord Cao's personal cave and see the portraits of himself and his family. These caves are one of the many types of Buddhist temples. Back then, lay people like Ah Long could come to Lord Cao's cave to pray and chant sutras. Artists turned the stories in the Buddhist scriptures into pictures, which were painted onto the walls of the caves. Those who were illiterate could learn Buddhist scriptures just by looking at those frescoes. For instance, this mural with a baby carriage describes the Sutra of Filial Gratitude. This tells people to support their parents, to know gratitude. Lotus children of the Infinite Sutra are represented by children in underwear on the walls. What's more, the pre-entry customs of cleaning one's body, brushing one's teeth, and washing one's hair are also depicted via fresco.
Because the paintings at Dunhuang tell us a lot about, they're a reflection of the life at the time, and the people in them are the people who were living at the time. An artist at Dunhuang would draw the things he knew and the people he saw. So we can see a lot from that.
In order to illustrate the scriptures, Mogao's painters look to everyday life for inspiration. In doing so, they preserve those scenes for us to study. Take, for instance, our protagonist, Ah Long's wedding regalia, which would have looked something like an image taken from one of Dunhuang's murals. Let's let makeup artist Yang Shu-yun explain how we get from this image to the Tang-era Ah Long.
In the Tang Dynasty poem, flowers adorn the face of the lass. 14 to 15-year-old girls of the time all knew to decorate their face with flowers. There's two types used, those adhered and those drawn on. The adhered decorations are referred to as sticking flowers. In the Dunhuang murals, we can indeed see women with 23 flowers stuck on their face.
In the Dunhuang frescoes, there appears a woman with a pair of mallards drawn on her face. This reminds Yang Shu-yun of the concept of applying blush to one's face.
First, they draw mallards, and then they apply rouge. Afterwards, you remove the mallards. Today, the design is a butterfly, since that's more fashionable now.
Tang women had very pronounced blushes and very large faces. It may seem hard to believe, but for this professional makeup artist, there may be another explanation.
Full and round faces, or rather large faces, require more and wider application of pigments in smaller faces, which also makes the effect stand out more, especially if the eyes are spaced further apart. This type of face will react very strongly to any sort of colored makeup. Let me demonstrate. If you want this person to look very filled out, the first option is to turn and use red on the cheeks. Color plays a big part. That way, the impression that she gives is that she is healthy, nourished, very lively.
This type of color and liveliness inspired new ideas for makeup artist Li Dongqian.
Let's use these circles to get rid of those stray eyebrow hairs. That way we can turn these babies single-sided. How's that for applying modern concepts to ancient methods?
The murals allow us to see fashion trends as they were a millennium ago. Why was Dunhuang so into fashion? What was the city like when Ah Long was alive there all those years ago?
Different ethnicities came together like a modern city. A city like Beijing or New York City or even London. Whatever they do to their hair or whatever clothes they wear, no one really feels out of place.
They were living in a cosmopolitan city. There were many things to buy, many luxuries, many entertainments, very good music, dance, good restaurants to eat at, very good food to be had, lovely silks to buy, new things coming from abroad, and you could buy goods from all around the world.
This is the city of Dunhuang today. It is very different from its state 1,000 years ago. Officials, monks, and caravans used to congregate here from all around. Government officers welcomed honored guests with polo games. People earned a lot and spent a lot, and were eager to travel. There were specialized travel industries in the market, schools for manners and translations, and one can find professional travel guides and camel teams. The visitors to Dunhuang 1,000 years ago passed through the city in pursuit of wealth and their dreams. As for today, the renown of the Mogao Caves and the Library Cave has spread far and wide. The city itself has become the goal for tourists. The cosmopolitan nature of the city almost makes people forget the desolate desert outside its borders. What is that place like? The wind howls on like a demon. The sand dunes loom like great ogres, ready to consume what little life's there. What sustains people willing to brave this suicidal journey can only be two things: money and faith. This is the season in which Ah Long went to court. Dunhuang's residents are currently preparing for the Lantern Festival. Every December 8th in the lunar calendar, Dunhuang's Buddhists light lamps before Mogao's statues to represent the enlightenment of their faith. This is the fixture where the oil lamps are hung. It is called the Tree of Light. The chandeliers in the murals were sometimes over 10 layers tall. Hundreds of lamps can be placed on one such fixture. During the festival, the fixtures are placed inside the caves. The lamps on every branch were ignited. People pray by lamplight, sing songs and dance, paying homage to the Buddha and seeking blessings. Looking from a distance, every opening in Mogao is filled with light. In the desert night, it resembles a great ship carrying its faithful occupants towards nirvana.
Along? How can you prove this land really belongs to you?
Your Honor, this was left by my son. It's the receipt from when we had rented out the land. This will prove it.
Long's son's land leasing contract with an outside party is her only claim of ownership for this land. But Long's son is dead, and the Suo Jinjun, who is the officially acknowledged owner of the land, has returned to the snowy peaks of Chilian. Now Lord Cao must make his final verdict based on this expired agreement. This contract seems small within the scope of China's history, as small as a grain of sand on top of Mount Mingsha, easily scattered by the winds. However, history often bucks all expectations.
She's not in history otherwise. We only know her from history because of this one little court case, and the documents have survived purely by accident. And it's a wonderful opportunity.
In order to survive, he rode his horse back to Nanshan.
Long and her distant family continued fighting over the inheritance. But the man who instigated the legal battle had long left. The government decided to award the land to Suo Jinjun as part of the Suo family's property, but let Long plant and harvest the fields. The daily monotony of agrarian life did not seem appealing to Jinjun, who had fully embraced the lifestyle of the nomadic herders. He thus decided to bequeath the land to a distant nephew, Suo Fonu, and then return to his nomadic way of life. Summer had arrived. The grapes of the Qin family of Yuyachuan village have begun to sprout. The work that began that spring seems to look very promising. The people of Dunhuang like their flour-based foods. Long's generation knew how to use naturally occurring yeast to make dough rise. Extensive wheat fields can be seen growing in China's northwest. These are dumplings and desserts originating from Tang-era Xinjiang. The dry climate there means that flour-based foodstuffs keep for longer than average. The food being made right now is called thousand-layered cakes, after their many layers of many colors, each derived from plant-based additives. The colors of the Northwest are rather monotonous, sand and dust as far as the eye can see. Perhaps that is why locals like to make their cuisine so colorful. Mrs. Chin is making a local spin on noodles today. Mrs. Chin is making a local spin on noodles today. Here's how the ancients described it. Flat and wide, about a thumb's worth, 2 inches long per strand, and boiled in water that's just reached boiling temperature. The Dunhuang manuscripts record another special recipe for what was called slurry noodles. 1,000 years ago, as is the case today, the people of the Tang used fermented celery and leek to make a slurry, scooping out a bowl of the mixture to add to noodles or rice for their meals. It was sour and cool, perfect for a hot summer's day. Before losing her land, these gourmet foods were an everyday sight on her dinner table. Whether that would remain the case depended on the outcome of her court case.
Let them submit their case. Then we will judge.
As we can see from this document, they had a unique way for plaintiffs to submit their cases. They used their middle fingers to sign their testimonies. Judging from the position of Ah Long's middle finger marks, we can tell that this is the testimony Ah Long gave close to 1,000 years ago. This is a priceless resource that helps us understand our rich cultural history, giving us an endless imagination.
So she was someone who had a lot of determination and a certain amount of strength, because to go through that is very difficult, and to keep on fighting and to keep on living is very tough.
Ah Long's personality and fate has been cleared up in the narrative and minds of Dunhuang scholars little by little. Experts have thought that maybe she has provided proof of her wedding ceremonies. We return once again to Mount Mingsha, where Tan Chanshu, who has been observing local customs for Dunhuang's ethnic studies, can help reveal the customs and details of Ah Long's wedding ceremonies.
As people say, make use of your surroundings. Take this family, the Qins. They lived at the foot of Mount Mingsha. They raised a camel. With the Mogao caves nearby, tourists came from all over the world to sightsee. So they took the camel out and rented it to the tourists. The land ships of the deserts of the Silk Road era have been turned into recreational attractions for Dunhuang tourism industry. Adaptation isn't a recent phenomenon. Of the many beautiful paintings of the Mogao cave walls, some have been wedding portraits. Look, this was the horseback procession that led the wedding ceremonies in ancient paintings. During the Tang 5th Dynasty era, a scholar who lived in Dunhuang said, "The saints, many saints, live in niches atop their clouds held aloft by the people." These niches refer to the many caves that adorn the cliff sides of Mogao. Inside these caves are sculptures dating from over 1,000 years of Chinese history and countless frescoes. Dunhuang Buddhism is rather profound. One of the scriptures is entitled The Sutra of Life under Maitreya, describing the beauty of life under the incarnation of Buddha. Man's life expectancy was to be 8,400 years, and women married once they turned 500. How would artists go about illustrating this? They did it by basing their paintings on scenes from an idolized everyday wedding.
The structure where Ah Long and her groom performed their wedding ceremony is called the Turquoise Cottage, which imitated the willow frame yurts used by nomadic tribesmen. These structures were built in the bride's yard for the wedding ceremonies. This is a Tang illustration of a turquoise cottage. Such structures could be rented for the ceremonies. Such structures could be rented for the ceremonies and collapsed for storage when not in use. Women were not inferior to men in Dunhuang during the Tang. The customs of the time dictated that respects be paid to the bride's family. When performing the ceremony, it was the male who bowed, not the female. The groom kneeled to pay his respects, while the bride made a short bow. This custom of matriarchal dominance was the norm in 10th century Dunhuang, which shows that the local customs were influenced by the many minorities that lived in the area. Many different ethnicities frequented Dunhuang. Some people's dreams were born there, while others' dreams died there. And what of Ah Long's wishes for the future? The land that she fought is here at the base of Mount Mingsha. The grapevines that were revealed during the spring have now borne fruit. Those grapes, which Mrs. Tong has harvested, are now bound for all corners of the nation. The land here is the lifeblood of the local population.
Cao Yunzong has listened to the two parties' arguments. With a stroke of his pen, he made a shocking verdict. He ruled that the land is rightfully owned by Suo Jinjun and his nephew. That much is immutable. But Ah Long is lost without it, and has not claimed a bit of income from this parcel of land in these tens of years. Thus, he ruled that from now on, Ah Long is free to earn her share of the harvests. From this verdict, we can tell that Cao Yunzhang is truly a fair arbitrator. His rulings are based in logic and fact, and fully legal. During this era, the longest anyone held the role of arbitrator was around 30 years. The ruling left on this court document, penned by his own hand, is a very precious piece of our history indeed.
The court officials sealed the case file, along with Ah Long's fingerprint and Lord Cao's signature, diligently securing the seals. Who knows when it will be needed as a precedent? But the next time this case was examined, 1,000 years have passed. In 2007, Dunhuang Turpan Academy Secretary Chai Jianhong arrived at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France to conduct a business transaction in order to purchase Ah Long's case along with scores of other documents for repatriation to China. In April of 2008, we arrive in France, finally to gaze upon Ah Long's name written in long-dried ink with our own eyes. Over 1,000 years later, this document has opened for the first time in front of us. Who knows what other 1,000-year-old secrets lie in these Dunhuang manuscripts, stored away in locations all over the globe, waiting to be uncovered. The Dunhuang of history is mythical in reputation. Reading its ancient documents and appraising its murals leads one to imagine its past stories. But behind that paint and ink are real stories of real lives, whose legacies have continued unabated to the present day, right at the foot of this Mount Mingsha.